Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you for coming. Hi. It's my role tonight and pleasure to introduce our Dean, Christopher Hill, and Foreign Minister Heraldo Muñoz. And before I start, I want to make sure that I thank some of the many people that I see here. Without all of your support, the Latin America Center would not exist, much less be inaugurating tonight. There are a number of Korbel students who've been tireless in getting this event started. Anthony Navarrete, David Coppers, Yesenia Prodero, Darren Harvey, Adrian Nava, Monica Wright. The staff at Korbel have also been a great aid. Janet Roll, Alicia Kirkby, Ann Irving, Jennifer Thompson, a number of the Latin America-focused colleagues that I have as scholars here at University of Denver are here. Lynn Holland, Sally Hamilton, Rebecca Galemba, I saw Cullen Hendricks earlier, Rafael Lloris, Matt Taylor, and Michelle Moran-Taylor, and my associate director, of course, Oliver Kaplan. They're also important supporters of Korbel and the Latin America Center, who I appreciate seeing tonight. Doug Scrivener is the chair of the Board of Trustees of the University of Denver. Cappy Shopnek was here earlier. She's the vice chair. Jim Polsfoot is the chair of the Social Science Foundation, which is Korbel's internal quasi-board. Greg Kvistat, our provost, was going to be here. And I want to recognize some of the supporters who joined us all the way from Latin America. Eduardo Barandiaran, Consul General de Peru. Jorge Tagle, Consul General de Chile. I should mention that we can thank Jorge and the Trade Commission of Chile in Los Angeles, Pro Chile, for the wine tonight. So that makes a round of applause for that. Makes every inauguration better. I also want to recognize some of the aides who've traveled with Minister Muñoz from Chile, Rodrigo Donoso, Lorena Diaz, and of course, I want to thank my dean, Ambassador Christopher Hill, who's been extremely supportive of the Latin America Center. Foreign Minister Muñoz flew overnight to get here. He's participating in multiple events for us, and he flies back tomorrow. We truly appreciate this dedication to his alma mater and the cause of U.S. Latin American affairs more generally. I appreciate all of you in attendance here tonight. Some of you are my students, my colleagues, people from the community who wish to support the center. You are the constituents of the Latin America Center, and we appreciate your support. The center wouldn't exist if it were not for all of you. Before I introduce our speakers, I do want to say a few words about why I'm so excited to inaugurate a Latin America Center at the University of Denver. To begin, today is the Cinco de Mayo, so what better day to have an inauguration of a Latin America Center? Also, it's a real lacuna that there has not been a Latin America Center, a premier Latin America Center in the Rocky Mountain West. There are historic, demographic, cultural, and economic reasons that Denver really ought to have a Latin America Center. Yet, no institution has shown the capacity to be a hub, to drive debates, and to draw the participation of other regional universities and community leaders and policymakers and businesses who are connected to Latin America. It's especially important now as the US and Latin America are at a real crossroads. We're at the end of a moment of relative neglect, you could say, when the US was distracted by adventures in other regions. And the Western Hemisphere was experiencing a particular combination of political and economic conditions. That cycle, those conditions are drawing to a close. And this means that there's an opportunity for deeper US-Latin American relations. Yet, the existing Latin America centers that are out there, they're on the coasts, and they're embedded in establishment thinking, and that means that they're likely to come up with the traditional one-size-fits-all approaches. Not us. We're here in the mountains, and we look down on the coasts, at least we like to think that we do. We can think of better and alternative solutions to the shared problems that are faced by the countries in the hemisphere. We want to be the alternative Latin America Center. We want to be the Sundance Film Festival of Latin America centers. So I want to say a few words of introduction about our two speakers tonight. Christopher Hill is the Dean of Korbel. He was a career diplomat, ambassador 4 times, appointed by 3 presidents, including service as ambassador to Iraq, Korea, Poland, and Macedonia. He was Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs. He served during the wars in the Balkans, negotiated with the North Koreans, and was appointed by Secretary of State Clinton to serve in Iraq. I've heard him say that his service as Dean of Korbel is harder than all of those posts. But if you've not read his book, Outpost, you should. It's a very funny and smart text. A few observations in it are really crystal clear. At critical moments, skilled diplomats can alter the course of history. I won't spoil the book for you by telling you some of the stories, but Dean Hill was there at Dayton when some might argue that the US and the world came together to solve a seemingly intractable problem. Hardworking diplomats who did everything they could to understand the places they were working and the perspectives of their interlocutors inched the world forward. In perusing the work and the career of Foreign Minister Heraldo Muñoz, one gets a parallel and a similar view of a skilled and experienced diplomat. Minister Muñoz was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs by President Michelle Bachelet in 2014. He served previously as Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, Assistant Administrator and Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean for the UN Development Program, Ambassador Permanent Representative of Chile to the United Nations, Chairman of the UN Peacebuilding Commission, and President of the UN Security Council. He's been Minister Secretary General of Government, Ambassador of Chile to Brazil and the OAS. He holds an MA and a PhD in International Studies from the Korbel School. And he's written over a dozen books, including a really incisive and important case that he makes for multilateralism in his book, Solitary Wars. In this book, he convincingly advances the argument that multilateral, shared solutions are more effective, more efficient, and more legitimate than outcomes produced through unilateral action. Let me finish by saying that I've known Foreign Minister Muñoz since I was a teenager in Washington, D.C., and he was an ambassador to the OAS. And in every encounter, he's always been generous, interesting, and principled. No one can forget that he risked his life to fight for democracy in his country. And he reminds me that there are times in life when you meet someone who is great, who is top of their profession, of their field. There are also times when you meet someone who is good, dedicated to a more just and moral world. But rarely do you meet somebody who's both great and good, and Minister Muñoz is such a person. Korbel is lucky to be associated with two of the most accomplished diplomats of their respective countries. They've demonstrated in their diplomatic and their scholarly work that we can inch the world forward towards shared solutions when skilled diplomats advance their national interest, accept the legitimacy of other countries' national interests, and work to understand the contexts in which they operate. I'm proud to know these two diplomats, these scholars, advocates for a more cooperative world order, and I'd like you all to join me in welcoming them as they take their seats on the stage. Please. So to get our conversation started, I'm going to abuse my position as introducer and pose a question that draws on their parallel experiences and outlooks. And then our Dean Hill will guide an ongoing conversation with Foreign Minister Muñoz, and we'll have some time for questions at the end. So what I'd like to ask is for you to identify a contemporary global challenge that needs a multilateral and negotiated solution, but is not currently getting it. And why not? So thank you.
You first. Before I respond, let me thank all of you, Dean Hill, Aaron Schneider, and many of you that I've known in the past. A lot of people that I don't know. Happy to see new faces. There's a couple of my former professors from my time here, so I'm very glad to see them and see some of my Chilean friends who are also here. We were a small community, but a very tight community because it was a dictatorship at the time, and many of my friends came directly from jail to Denver or Boulder, and I have a very strong friendship with them, so I'm very glad to see them. Let me tell you that my experience at Denver was transforming because it allowed me to comprehend the world better, to have the analytical tools, the theoretical framework, to confront some of the issues in the practical world. So I hope that some of you will find that useful pursue your own endeavors. I came 40 years ago. The building that used to be it's the old building was a new building then. It still looks modern though, but I want to congratulate all of you and Chairman Scribner, including because of the work that has been done to have this new, huge, beautiful building. It's an attraction, and I think it's an inspiration as well. During that time, I met great people here, and that's why I took the time to come here when schedule for a foreign minister is always hectic. There's always a crisis somewhere, and it's put on your lap, and you have to decide. And when it's really complicated, and you don't want to take all of the blame, you ask the president. But you are not to ask the president, generally. So, but I had to take the time to come over here, and I'm very pleased. Let me tell you that I studied a lot. They made me work really hard, but it was useful. I remember that I was offered a job to be assistant director at the Woodrow Wilson Center for Scholars in Washington, for the Latin America Center. And I said no to a great scholar, Abe Lowenthal, who was one of the greatest in the fields. And Abe told me, you've been the only person that has rejected me in all of my life. I offered a job and you said no. And I said no because I wanted to go back to Chile. And even though it was a dictatorship, I thought I had a moral commitment to fight the dictatorship. The only interesting thing that I'll tell you is that I got my PhD in 1978. I went back to Chile in September 1978, and I fell in jail in February 1979. So a PhD won't keep you away from jail. So at least that's my experience. But it's a lot of stories, but let me go to the question, and thanking you all to be here. I think there's many challenges that have to be confronted through multilateralism. Migration, terrorism, humanitarian crisis. But I want to put one that is closer to Chile and that's fundamental for the future, and that is climate change and oceans. Because fortunately, when we met in Paris last November, we were able to agree on a deal to stop the temperature of the world from going over 2 more degrees Celsius. Which, if that happens, it will be the future of humanity at stake. There can be nothing more important than that. And each country made commitments that were signed in New York, and now we hope that will be ratified and complied with. And why is it fundamental for a country like Chile? And why oceans? Because the oceans, actually we should talk about the ocean because it's one single ocean. Scientists have proven that the various currents make it a single one. It's a sink for greenhouse gases, so that the ocean can help us deal with the problem. The problem is the ocean, it's in danger because of acidification, because of the increase of the temperature. Second, because of plastic pollution. And third, because of illegal and unreported fishing, which is the third most profitable illegal activity after drug trafficking and illegal arms trade, illegal fishing. So these are the threats that the ocean faces us. That's why ocean and climate change, in my view, requires a multilateral approach. We were successful in Paris, and now we have to comply. And why do I say that from my perspective? Because Chile is a long country with a long coast, and the future depends on the ocean. And we've taken our commitment. And with John Kerry, last year, we organized a conference in Chile, in Valparaiso, the main port. He had taken the initiative of organizing an event in Washington, and I took up the challenge. And I told John, let's go to Chile, and let's invite more countries, and let's have voluntary commitments. The idea was not to have a talk shop, But each country that went there was going to make a commitment to save the oceans and thus combat climate change. And Chile said, we're going to organize the conference. We're going to accede the New York Accord, which allows countries that are part of it to fiscalize what happens beyond the 200-mile limit. In other words, in the high seas. So we can board ships that are fishing and depleting the highly migratory species that go in and out the 200-mile economic zones. We did that. And third, we said we're going to designate marine protected areas, which are savings accounts for the ocean. And we designated, I worked with the Navy and I worked with the Ministry of the Environment, 300,000 square kilometers, 300,000 square kilometers around the Desventuradas Islands in the north of Chile. And now we're working. By the end of the year, we will have 720,000 square kilometers around Easter Island, Rapa Nui. So by the end of the year, Chile will have marine protected areas more than 1 million square kilometers. And that's going to be the largest marine protected area in the world. So that, I think, would be one of the challenges that I would say are fundamental, because one doesn't see it so obviously as drug trafficking, for example, but it's a lot more fundamental in terms of our future.
Yeah. Mr. Minister, let me shift the focus a little to the region of Latin America, because there have been a number of very important political developments, one of which Chile has been very involved in, of course, and that is the winding down, and we hope the end of the civil war within Colombia, and the essentially integration of the FARC back into, or its people back into a civilian life. The other enormous development, and I would really appreciate your thoughts on this, is what the United States has done in terms of our relationship with Cuba. And I think the move, some people say it was long overdue, some people say it should never have happened. It's been quite a polarizing event in the United States, although the polls indicated more and more people support it. But I wonder if I could ask you, as someone who's a keen observer of these security issues, where do you think this is going to take the overall region?
Mm-hmm. Well, as regards Colombia, we are very committed, Chile is, to the peace process between the government and the FARC guerrillas. In fact, Chile has been one of the so-called accompanying countries. There's 4 countries that are participating as supporters of the process, and that is Norway, Cuba, Venezuela, and Chile. And all of us meet, and I've designated 2 ambassadors to be dedicated solely to that. And they meet and negotiating in Cuba. The negotiation is progressing quite well, with ups and downs. With any peace negotiation, that's the way it is. It's not easy when you've had decades of war. So I'm confident that there will be a positive outcome in a couple of months, at the most, probably June, late June, that the deal may be closed. The conversations have progressed really well in the last sets of meetings. And we find that that is good not only for Colombia to find peace, but for the region. Yeah. The possibilities for Colombia, if the areas that are occupied by the FARC guerrillas were to be developed for agriculture, will make Colombia an agricultural power. They already are important, but they would be fundamental for the region, for the world.
They kind of produce the wrong crops, though.
Yeah, but they produce flowers, they produce other things other than, and actually they are not so much producers, but they are manufacturers. Well, the point is that they have an enormous possibility, and Chile is very committed. Question is, what happens once the deal is closed? How do we verify? And as you know, and we know because we've done this for many years, verifying is the key. Yeah. I mean, doing the deal is one part of the problem, but then the most difficult one is to make it stick. And Chile is committed to the observation process. There's been a Security Council resolution that created a political mission of observation. And Chile has already said we will be there. We will send our troops, will be unarmed troops. There won't be the blue helmets. And so we're seeing now whether we do it alone with Argentina, with other countries. There will be Latin American countries verifying. So we're quite excited about the prospects. In addition to that, Colombia has just agreed on the beginning of a negotiation of the other guerrilla group, which is a smaller group, the so-called ELN. Chile will be a guarantor of that process as well, and they've asked Chile to be a meeting place for the conversations between the government. But if you do the FARC deal, that would be, 80% of the problem or more. As regards Cuba and the United States, we support it wholeheartedly, the reestablishment of diplomatic relations and the normalization between the United States and Cuba. It was long overdue because it was like a remnant of the Cold War. I mean, the Cold War, in a sense, continued to exist in Latin America to the extent that you had that anomaly of lack of relations between Cuba and the United States. What we hope is that the embargo will be lifted because that's the other main part that is still pending. And I'm very glad that that there is from DU there's I've heard that there are groups going there now. You don't need to have an academic group. Correct. The doors are beginning to open. And so I think that would be good for Cuba. It will be good for the United States. And it will be good for the rest of the region. We have Chileans investing there, Mexicans, Colombians going and taking advantage of a new situation in Cuba. And we hope that it will continue to evolve.
Do you think they'll have a democratic election there before another 50 years? Or?
Well, you know that I'm foreign minister, so I can't speak my mind.
Because I want to ask you who's going to win the American election, too. But,
you have another easy question for me. No, I hope that Cuba goes along the path of democracy, of transparency, and full respect for human rights. Chile, on this issue, is very clear. We have a principled foreign policy, but at the same time, as any foreign policy, is one of realism because we have to mind our own national interests. So we have to combine foreign policy is all about the balance between principles and national interests. So we hope that Cuba continues along a way that benefits the people. And when we speak about human rights, we do it respecting the principle of non-intervention, but we feel that it was a universal gain to speak about human rights, that is not a violation of the principle of non-intervention. So, but you have to recognize that the Cubans have also made enormous strides as regards other human rights, because generally when we speak about human rights, we tend to only think about the political and civic, but it's the economic and the social ones. And they made huge strides in that sense, and one has to take that into account as well.
I want to ask about another issue, but it embraces not only Latin America, but also Asia and Pacific, and that is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This has come up in our election debates. There have been some very careful and thorough discussions about it in our election process. That's a joke. But I wonder if you can speak to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I mean, I worked on Asia. I was delighted to see this effort to kind of build on some of the structures we already have. And I guess I would argue it really needs multilateralism, but it also needs some key players, including my country.
Yeah. Well, I went 13 hours to New Zealand to sign the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, on 4th of February. I stayed there 6 hours, and I took the same plane back 13 hours. And I hope it was worth the effort. But no, I mean, our perception is this is a positive agreement for Chile. I can speak for Chile. I can speak for the others. First, Chile has had a foreign policy that has been opening up to the world. That's been the key to our prosperity, to our having eliminated poverty. From the dictatorship, we inherited a country with 39% of the population under the poverty level. 39% of the people in Chile were poor. Today is 8%. And prosperity, creation of employment, social policies have made a huge difference. And one of the elements for that was free trade. Free trade with the European Union, with Latin American countries, with the US, with Canada. And this is a continuation of that. Why is it important for Chile? First, because we will have better access to markets. About 1,600 products will enter duty-free to the other 11 countries. About 1,400 products will enter with lower tariffs. In addition to that, there's the global value chains, because there's been, this is a bit technical, but nevertheless, what is called the rules of origin have, in the case of the TPP, been changed to understand that an import from another country is a national input. So that you bring an input from another country of the TPP, you elaborate it, and you can re-export it as if it was wholly yours. And that links you into the global value chains. And that is fundamental for a country like Chile. Third, there's measures to impede non-tariff barriers, because today it's relatively easy to sign free trade agreements, but then come the non-tariff barriers, the sanitary, phytosanitary measures. So there will be measures to eliminate that. And there's labor and environment chapters, and for the first time ever in a free trade agreement, a whole chapter for small and medium enterprises. So for us, it was positive. It's controversial. The TPP has a bad image.
In your country?
In my country as well, yeah. There's a lot of young people, particularly that have gone to protest in front of the foreign ministry and that say things about me because I signed it. But I signed it because it was a collective decision, but now it will have to be discussed in Congress. Now, let me tell you that 6 months ago, I wouldn't have signed the free trade agreement, the TPP, because 6 months ago, it had elements that were totally unacceptable to us. A year ago or 2 years ago, even more, because this was evolved for 5 years, you know, and a lot of the issues that were put on the table seemed quite disagreeable to a country like Chile or to any country, except maybe the largest of the TPP countries. For example, let me give you an example. At the moment of the negotiation, I'm not going to say the country that pushed this, but this country said, for example, surgical discoveries, surgical procedures invented by a doctor, let's say in Minnesota, okay, will have to be patented, and you will have to pay royalties if you use the same surgical procedure in Chile. And we thought that was absolutely unacceptable. First, morally, but also, how are you going to make the surgeon in Rancagua, in the southern part of Santiago, accountable? Yeah. There was no way.
So in the end,
in the end, that part of the negotiation was pushed aside, and never went forward. It was because it was unpracticable. Yeah. But it stayed in the minds of many. The things that were being asked, particularly in the area of patents, you know, intellectual property, that was really complicated to a lot of countries. Chile defended its interests and its sensible sectors, particularly pharmaceutical, biological pharmaceuticals. That was our most sensitive area. And we said, We're going to have the 5-year the protection of data and no more than that. And that's what we got. So bottom line, we have a good evaluation. It's a balanced agreement, but I have to recognize that some countries probably did not come out as well. In the end, I think that this will be the standard for the 21st century in terms of trade, services, and investment.
Are you do you expect some job loss in some sectors and job gains? I mean, do you anticipate?
I expect job gains. I don't see any possibility of job losses. I simply don't see it. And I expect job gains in the agro-industrial sector, particularly because there's where most of the benefits of access to markets. Our access to the Japanese market was not very good, and we, as part of the deal, we have a very good access now to Canada, to several other countries, and new areas. For example, government purchases, for example, which wasn't in many of the bilateral deals that we had. Now it's in the TPP with a lot of the other partners. So I don't see any damages for us of it, but it's unpopular, and it's unpopular in an election year. So that's why I follow very closely what the candidates or pre-candidates are saying. And in an election year, it's difficult to talk about trade when there's the impression that you are exporting jobs.
Yeah. Well, I suspect it will continue to be an issue in our election.
And we have to go to our, you have to go through Congress, we have to go through Congress, and there will be we have a very vibrant democracy, and there will be debate.
Yeah. So I think we'll go to maybe the audience for some questions. We've got some time. Yes, sir. And do we have a microphone? Is this?
I'm curious how you would describe the relationship that Chile has with the United States. The last time I went to Santiago and flew in, there was a sign that said, everyone in the any other passport goes in this line. Americans go in this line. Americans must pay $50 to enter the country. Everyone else goes in free. Now, I realize that's probably a trivial tit for tat because America has visa requirements that may be onerous for Chileans. But how would you describe the state of relationships between the United States and Chile today?
I think it's an excellent bilateral relationship, and let me clarify what happened to you. But it wasn't $50, it was actually $100. What happens is that we have that line because Chileans, when they come to the U.S., are charged $100. So it's strictly reciprocity. We have it with a couple of other countries. You charge our people, we charge you. We don't make exceptions. So, but now we have solved it. And with the Canadians, we have the same problem. And now issues solved, no need to do that line. So,
the answer is write to his congressman here and get rid of the $100 fee.
Right, exactly. Yeah. That's the issue. By the way, my wife is American, so I can hardly have any problem with Americans. But relationships are excellent. Let me give you an example. President Bachelet was elected in March of, actually she took office in March of 2014, and she was the first Latin American head of state to be invited by President Obama to the White House in June 2014. And the relationship at the presidential level is excellent, and I have a very good relationship with John Kerry. I was mentioning what with partner on oceans and many other issues. We have a similar view of our multilateral affairs, but we have differences. And we have differences in the past. Chile was adamant against the U.S. intervention in Iraq, and we, when we were in the Security Council in 2003, we said we're not going to give a blank check to a resolution that seeks to give seal of approval to the use of force by the Security Council. And we, until the end, and we had some rough discussions at that time. But that doesn't mean that we're not strategic partners, which we are. We were just at this nuclear security summit in Washington about a month ago, only 57 countries invited, but President Obama, and Chile was there. Chile, Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico. So we have an excellent relationship. Trade between the two countries has grown at 16% rate every year since we signed in 2003 our free trade agreement. We're working with the U.S. at the sub-federal level because we have gotten an agreement with Chile, California that is going really well and looking at innovation, technology. Same thing with Massachusetts, and now the state of Washington is very interested in, and has actually suggested, why don't we do the same? So I would say relations are absolutely excellent, which doesn't mean that we don't disagree every once in a while. And sometimes to be friends, you have to be frank and disagree when it's needed. You know? But generally, I would say 70% of the time we're in agreement.
Yes. Hi there.
Thank you for this enlightening conversation. And I have two questions. One is external to the foreign minister. The other is internal, appropriate for a PhD from our school. So the external question is about TPP. I think this was quite nice to bring up this issue. And I keep telling people I'm a humble economist, but nobody believes me. I actually did some modeling, and you're quite right that different countries will have differential impacts. But outside of the model, there are two things that concern people. One is the dispute settlement mechanism. The concern here is that transnational corporations actually might violate sovereignty of individual countries. Imposing a collective will on even a country like Chile, which explicitly, and according to my own calculations too, will gain in many sectors. And the second is 5% capacity. Whether that's what the security and my second question has to do with the southern part of Chile. Our other PhD, Claudio Gonzalez, teaches at the University of Concepcion in the south. He's a Mapuche. So I'm concerned about the indigenous people of Chile, what the policies have been, and what we would like to do.
Well, let me answer your first question about the dispute settlement mechanism. It all depends on the country concerned. One signs according to one's decision. In our case, we already have the exact settlement mechanism in the bilateral with the U.S. So we're not doing anything new. It so happens that we've had a bilateral agreement more than a decade. And there have been moments in which the U.S. has said, oh, you're not fully complying. Do you know how many times the U.S. has gone to that dispute settlement mechanism? 0 times. Okay? So we said, you don't agree, sue us. They haven't done it. Okay? So, I mean, we are at ease with the mechanism that we signed. I mean, we have to be responsible about what we sign. Chile, at least, is doing its own work. And that dispute settlement mechanism, since we have it already in some bilateral treaty, for us, it's not a problem. With regard to the question about Claudio, I have great fondness for him, and in fact, I helped for him to come here. I was the first Chilean to come to the Korbel school, and then I promoted, and I asked professors that they would recruit other Chileans, and several came. Claudio was one of them. And I recommended that why didn't he get involved with the Mapuche issue, and he did. And for us, it's a very important issue. It's a minority that was repressed during the colonial times, and we have like a pending debt still. And the issue is that where they live, which is in the south of Chile, is the poorest of the regions of Chile. And there's been a lot of inclusion, but there's a lot more work to be done. So it's one of the challenges that we have as a nation, to understand that we're a multi-ethnic and a multicultural nation. And that's why we want a constitutional process of reform, and that's what we are doing right now in Chile. It's a very complicated issue because having a new constitution is not easy, and we are in the midst of the elaboration of a citizen discussion about what a new constitution should look like, or a constitution different than one we have. And then we are in that process. And one of the things should be the recognition of the indigenous peoples of Chile. And I'm very respectful because in the end it has been proven that about 90% of all Chileans, we are, in the various proportions, we are indigenous. So we have to honor our past. So I couldn't more fully agree with the work that Claudio does and with the concerns that all Chileans have. Not only the Mapuches, by the way. There's 9 Chilean peoples recognized as indigenous.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I'd just like to ask, you referred earlier to the fishing industry, but Chile, as many of you know, plays a very vital role in the global economy in that it fuels the industrialization, in particular today, of all of the world's populous developing countries, China, Indonesia, India, et cetera, with its production of copper. How do you sustain that industry, and which relies on the exploitation of a non-renewable natural resource for which Chile is very well endowed and has a fantastic resource position, but how do you sustain that industry and the impact it has, in particular in the outlying areas away from Santiago and the other populous centers of Chile?
Well, the copper industry in Chile is quite advanced, comparatively speaking. And a lot of technology has been added, including containing the environmental costs. And in that sense, I think is one of the extractive industries that had been responsible with regard to the environment. But the problem, I think, is larger than that. I think the issue is, can Chile continue to rely so strongly on the exports of a commodity like copper? That's the problem. And I think the challenge that we have ahead is how to add value to our exports, how to add innovation, technology, ideas. And I've been on a little campaign for a year about now to try to stimulate Chileans that can contribute in that sense. Increasingly, Chile is exporting services now. And that's the way we have to go. I've said it, and tomorrow I will speak a little bit about innovation and the world that we're facing, which is so different from that of the past couple of decades. And Chile is well known throughout the world because we have great poets and great wines. And copper, you know? And you're drinking some of the wine, by the way. But I said, you know, we need to be a country of architects, because Alejandro Aravena has just won the Pritzker Prize, which is the Nobel Prize in Architecture. And he has been named, he's a young architect, and he's been named the curator of the Venice Biennale of Architecture, which is the top of the line. And the Chilean Pavilion and Expo Milano, which was a great world fair on foodstuffs. The Chilean Pavilion won the second prize for architecture among 144 countries that have pavilions. So we ought to be a country of architects. we ought to be a country of filmmakers because a young group of Chileans won the Oscar of the Academy for the short film Bear Story. And that was a creative mind of these kids that did this was wonderful. And we ought to be a country of astronomers because Chile will have, by 2020, 75% of the capacity of observation of the world, of the galaxies by the observatories in the north of Chile. So 75% of the capacity of the world's observatories will be in Chile. And last year, a Chilean astronomer discovered a new galaxy. And those things, I think, are important. So we have to support that and stop being only a corporate producer. That's the challenge that we have. You know, that takes time, but we have to invest now. And there's a strong productivity agenda and an innovation agenda that we have in the government.
We'll send more students to Korbel. We won't train them how to produce copper. We'll train them in other things.
Absolutely.
So I think we're
pretty much going to close, and I just want to. I know that there are many questions, but we do have to move on to some other activities. I just want to close with one question, and that is, in your opinion, is it important or essentially important for Korbel to have a really premier Latin America center?
No. No, I think it's fundamental. I mean, I was so thankful that John McCammon brought me here. I was saying before that he was doing research at the Catholic University of Chile, where I was doing some graduate work, and then this was 1974. Basically, I was doing that because I was fired from my job when the military regime came in. So I had no job, and my house had been, well, they had gone to pick me up, the military, and they went into the wrong house. They went to the house next door. I told that story in a book. And so I went underground, and then months later, I decided to do something with my life, and I went to the Catholic University of Chile and see what I would do, and I met John McCammon. He was the only Latin Americanist at Korbel, at GSIS then. And I thought, I couldn't understand it because I was one only. And today, I was saying it before, there's 55 million Americans that are of Latino origin, 55 million. In 2050, there will be 119 million. The US exports 3 times more to Latin America than to China. We are the world's source of energy. 31% of fresh water is in Latin America. And well, agriculture possibilities are huge. And we are a source of, you know, of good contribution to the world, and not only negative as it appears, you know, migrants and drugs. So that, in my view, you've done really a great job by establishing the Latin America Center. I truly say it with all honesty, because this is a region, the hemisphere, that is integrating more and more. So you need to know your neighbors. You need to know what's going on south of the border. And I told John Kerry a couple of times, we are a zone of peace. If we have the Colombian deal, this will be a zone of peace. So we are more of a contribution. We're not part of the problem. We are actually part of the solution. So that's why I think it's such a great idea, and I congratulate you, Aaron, for having taken the initiative. And Dean Hill for having responded to it.